sitting next to Sammy and having him tell the story.
Okay.
That's what it's supposed to be like. So I'm supposed to disappear. I really don't care if Sammy wants to, say that he had sex with 75 women a week,
Okay.
I'm not there to point out that that's kind of difficult to do just from, point of time involved.
Right. And you had about 242 pages of the book. Was there stuff left out?
Yeah, that got asked before. You got to be kidding me. I mean, I've put all that stuff in. What would I leave out? Yeah, no, we used everything.
Okay. But many have criticized Sam for taking some cheap shots at the brothers and David Lee Roth in the book. Were you concerned about that at all?
I don't believe that's true. What cheap shots did he take?
Well, for example, he called Dave gay. He described the brothers heavily as dysfunctional drunks and stuff. So, were you concerned about those accusations?
You have to make sure that nobody commits any libelous statements. I mean,
Right.
Sammy's entitled to view on these people. It's just a question of whether it crosses that line. So far, I don't think anybody would quibble over the question of the Van Halen brothers and substance abuse.
Okay. Do you feel Sammy was far different from the Van Halen brothers in terms of civility? It seemed like he was far more mature and together, and these guys were living in a very immature, almost like childish, college-era fashion. It was like they were living in like a flop house and they were multi-millionaires, and meanwhile Sammy was well-dressed and drove a nice car and had a wife and kids and a house and went on vacations and lived sort of a nice lifestyle of a man.
I think that's a pretty good description of it. He was a little older than they were,
right?
And he came from a hard scrabble background. He had been quite focused on making his life economically secure, which is not what you find of a lot of rock musicians. They're more just following some fantasy and some dream and stumbling into this thing. And Sammy was very deliberate about trying to make a living and establish himself as a professional musician.
Absolutely. And throughout the book, it appears that being in Van Halen sort of changed Sam a bit. Would you agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I think Sam really became a part of that band, and that they formed a very strong and authentic bond, a different chemical equation than the David Lee Roth years. The four of them really, merged as a unit for quite a while. I think it was a really strong and serious and powerful rock band with a tense collaboration amongst all of them.
Now, the way he describes joining Van Halen in the book, he almost has a little bit of a highfalutin thing going on where he acts like he was almost doing them a favor a little bit by coming in there. Did you get that impression?
Oh, I don't know. Sammy was glad to be joining the band. It was a great opportunity. They were the greatest band in his field at that time.
Okay. And it seems like Sam put up with a lot to be part of Eddie Van Halen's musicality. Would you agree with that?
Interesting. I don't know. I never saw Sammy as that visionary a musician. Had a specific idea of what he wanted to do as an artist. I saw him more as a kind of craftsman type. Like, what needs to be done here? I'll do that. So that fits in with working with a genius guitar player like Eddie Van Halen probably better than say bringing somebody in who has like this strong, powerful idea of how music should be and what kind of music they're going to make.
What was your impression when he was joining the band? What was your takeaway? What was going through his head at that time?
It was a big leg up for somebody whose solo career was sort of stalling out and who was being brought into a super successful band. He was going to change jet streams, make all his dreams come true. I think it was a huge event for Sammy. I think he greeted it with extraordinary enthusiasm.
Now, it's interesting you say that because Sam will tell you that he was just as big as Van Halen was at the time.
He would say that, yeah. Did he think that? No, he knew better.
Okay, so that was just like hype and hyperbole from him, even though he Better?
Sammy's a little bit like, Muhammad Ali and Little Richard. And, he's the greatest. Just ask him.
So now the interesting thing is I have a theory about this. Do you know the whole story of Claudio, the car guy, and how they got hooked up?
Here we go.
No, seriously. You know what I'm talking about, Joel?
It's in the book. Yeah.
No, of course. Yeah, it's in the book. Like, Sammy tells that story, but do you think that's a little storybookish? It seems a little, I don't know, it seemed a little angled, don't you think? I mean, it almost seems like a PR story that he tells.
Sammy has a way of making stories sound a little bit, more epic than they may have been, but that's some Al antic, as I remember, smashing his face into the ground, and I can't remember the details. The Al antic, I was laughing until I was, nearly wet in my pants was when Sammy told me about and he wasn't there. They'd been relayed to him about the Benihana.
Oh yeah, the Benihana was this great. That was when Al was drunk on his birthday and he was falling all over the grill and he was burning himself because he took his pants down, all that shit. I'm talking about the story how Claudio kind of hooked him and Eddie up together, because the reason I bring this up, Joel, is because, Ted Templeman, the producer, Van Halen's producer, recently put out his book, and Ted Templeman told Sammy that Dave was leaving Van Halen on the phone before the whole press and everybody knew about it. This is back in 85 when we didn't have the internet and 24-hour media. It was, things could be kept under wraps. And it seemed like the way Sam sort of kind of came into Van Halen, he came in with his manager, him and his manager kind of took over the band. I mean, they literally took over the band. And in Ted Templeman's current book, he says that Sammy sort of swooped in like a guy who cozied up to a woman who had just left her husband type of thing.
Yeah, I saw Ted has a book out, and he says that he recommended that they fire Dave and put Sammy in.
Right.
I just read the review that said that. I haven't seen the book. I definitely want to read Ted's book. Mm-hmm. I ran across him when he was producing the Doobie Brothers. And as far as I could tell, the engineer was doing all the work, and Teddy was checking his stock pages. Yeah, who knows? All I know is what Sammy told me.
Right,
right. And Sammy's story is as we've related. And there's some truth to that. He came in, and he and Ed Leffler shook that band up and got them some discipline and got some focus, and they made a lot of dough. They sold a lot of records.
Oh, sure.
And they did a lot of concerts for big money.
Now, one thing that's mentioned in the book, which is interesting, and Sammy says it straight out. Did it surprise you that Warner Brothers didn't have much faith in the band with Sam?
Why would they? David Lee Roth seemed to be the whole show. I don't think anybody was expecting the band to succeed.
When you say David Lee Roth was the whole show,
he was the Mick Jagger and Eddie was the Keith. Obviously, Sammy was able to make this thing work, and he had enough of a vision, enough musical, wherewithal to give it some kind of, oomph and take it somewhere where it could go. There have got to be many examples of bands trading lead singers at that point in their career and it not working out very well,
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because Sam takes credit for the songs here. He says in the book, I worked on their jams and picked them apart and made songs out of them, which is sort of interesting because he gives sort of the impression that these guys were sort of kind of wildly living in this studio, just kind of jamming and tooling around all day, and that he would sort of craft a song out of their little bits and parts of what they were doing. Did you get that impression?
I think that's accurate. You talk about taking tapes and listening to them in the car and, finding licks. But that's not an uncommon process in the hard rock field.
Right. Now, in the book, Sam says Ted Templeman, this is a quote from the book, Ted Templeman had been supposedly bad rapping us to Warner Brothers behind our back, so we weren't going to work with him. Meanwhile, in Ted Templeman's new book, he says Sam and his manager Ed Leffler were begging him to produce the new album, but he declined. What do you make of that?
Well, who knows? I know Templeman also said he didn't like Jump. How could you not like Jump?
That's true. That's true.
That's very true. Well, Sammy doesn't like Jump.
Well, he doesn't like any of the Van Halen from David Lee Roth's era.
Well, here's my question to you, though. And I'm asking you as a pop music critic now, in addition to an author here. If you take the job as the lead singer of Van Halen, wouldn't be part of that job would be to sing the Van Halen catalog?
Well, you're going to have to. Sammy wanted to make hits as fast as he could with Van Halen so that he didn't have to deal with singing those old songs. I remember he was, didn't feel comfortable with those things at all.
But did Sam ever mention his hesitancy to not sing the old catalog? Because you just said, yeah, you're going to have to. But Sam really pushed back and refrained. I mean, he only would do 3 or so songs live at a show. He really did not want to sing the Van Halen catalog. I mean, he even said something like, I don't want to be in a cover band. I mean, he really pushed back. How do you get away with that with a band that it was as big as Van Halen was at that time?
Well, you better make the new record your fans' favorite. and they did that, they did. They went from Jump to Oh You Ain't One Two, and that was, the fans loved that record as much as, if not more, than any other of the Van Halen records. So that's how you do that.
Well, it's interesting.
It's not easy.
Yeah. No, it's not. The quote that he says in the book is, I told the guys I didn't want to be in a cover band. I didn't want to play too much of the old shit. But the interesting thing is, when Brian Johnson replaced Bon Scott in AC/DC, or when Ronnie James Dio replaced Ozzy in Black Sabbath, and even when Steve Perry came into Journey, they all played the older catalog that preceded them. I mean, it's almost part of the job, but it's amazing. Sam not only refused to do the old Van Halen songs, he got them to play his solo songs. Isn't that shocking to you?
I don't know, shocking. I mean, Sammy's a, pushy, aggressive guy. And I gather the Van Halen brothers are not so. They are malleable. It was an interesting collaboration. And Sammy is a very forceful personality with, definite ideas about how he wants presentation to be made.
He also refers to the band Van Halen throughout the book multiple times as the biggest band in the world. But it's very surprising because during that time period, Van Halen with Sammy Hagar, and you know this because you were a pop music critic, Van Halen with Sammy Hagar was never the biggest band in the world during 86 to 95. Bands like Aerosmith, Def Leppard, Bon Jovi, Metallica, Motley Crue, Nirvana were all bigger than Van Hagar. So where do you think he's getting at with that?
Well, we've already noted that Sammy has problems with mathematics.
That's for sure.
We were going to spend a whole hour on that, but
No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Well, I mean, it's interesting. And also the Michael Anthony situation was discussed in the book. What do you think the reason was behind this constant mistreatment of this guy?
Anthony, he's one of those sad sack kind of guys. I mean, I don't know who mistreated him, Sammy or the Van Halen guys, but,
Yeah.
He's a bass player. He's glad to be on the job, period.
Yeah, I think you're right. Now, one thing that came out of the book that was really intense was the sexual debauchery in the book was wild. And was Sammy worried about his family reading this stuff? I mean, it was pretty graphic.
I don't know what Sammy was thinking. About a month before the book comes out, his wife calls me and says, "Joel, I just read the book. My God." I go, "Well, yeah." She goes, "Joel, the PTA." I had kids in school at that time. I'm like, geez, well, I was assuming that, you'd been keeping up with this all along with Sammy. She goes, "Oh my God." Sammy was pretty, he obviously wanted that part of his legend in the story, right? Okay. He wanted to paint this epic picture of himself as, the classic rock star, the working class hero. He wanted you to appreciate not only his musical abilities, but his business acumen and his extraordinary personal struggles.
Were there any conversations like, Sam, I think your family might be upset at some of this stuff you're writing? Or
not my job.
Oh, okay. Or conversations like, Sam, you are burning the bridge with Van Halen if you put this stuff in the book.
Not my job. Sammy's big boy. You know, I'm helping there write his book. I'm not there to lead his life. If he wants to tell about being abducted by